I'm Laura Hendricks. I am associate professor in family and consumer economics here at the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service. And I have the honor of organizing these webinars monthly for the Financial Security for All Community of Practice. So if you ever have suggestions for topics, feel free to shoot me an email. And that being said, I'm so pleased to organize them, but could not do so without the help of the brilliant Mark Locklear. So thank you, Mark. Our topic for today is disaster preparedness. So we're covering planning, response, and recovery. And it's a timely topic because Preparedness Month is coming up. And so our webinar is being organized today, led today by Elizabeth Kish. Many of you know her. She's one of our community, and Elizabeth is our extension specialist at Kansas State University, and I'll let Elizabeth introduce the rest of our panel members. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to be here, and as the previous organizer of the webinar series, it's fun to actually be able to present. and thanks, Mark, for all of your assistance as well. We have our topic broadly is financial considerations for disasters and emergencies. So our other speakers today are Marty Gillen, who's an associate professor and extension specialist at the University of Florida, and Sarah Kroimans and Lori Hendrickson, who are both University of Minnesota extension professors. And the graphic you're seeing here is the graphic for National Preparedness Month, which, as Laura mentioned, is coming up starting next week on September 1st. And so this year the tagline is "Disasters don't plan ahead, but you can." And so it's very timely for us to be talking about getting financially prepared ahead of disasters. So we have a little poll here for you. I think Mark's going to bring it up.
It's displayed now.
Okay, great. And so if you would let us know, and this is what you have done, and be honest with yourself, within the past 12 months. So these are all things that, in general, we recommend people do in order to be somewhat prepared. I don't know that any of us can really be prepared for an emergency or disaster, but we can at least have a bit of peace of mind that we've done a few things. So go ahead and indicate which of these you've done. Have you prepared or updated your household inventory? Have you reviewed your homeowners or renters insurance policy? Reviewed your auto insurance policy? Created or updated a financial grab-and-go kit? And do you have or have you updated and practiced a family communication plan?
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm looking at this now. A few folks let me know in chat. I should have selected the option to choose more than one, because maybe you did do more than one. However,
okay.
I didn't. You can only choose one, folks. So just if you see one that you'd like to choose, just choose it. If it's none, of course, then you can click none.
Okay, and
so
that's great.
Yeah, we'll just take another 10 seconds and let folks vote there.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to end that poll, and then Elizabeth, let me know if you can see that.
I can see it.
Okay.
Okay, so even recognizing that you could only choose one, it looks like slightly fewer than a third of you have reviewed your homeowners and auto insurance. But about a third of you have done none of these things. So I guess it's an opportunity for you to think about what you will do. And hopefully if you're not sure where to start, you'll get some ideas today about where to start. Only a couple of you, and again, recognizing you could only choose one, the prepared or updated the household inventory, and fewer people have a financial grab-and-go kit. And actually, no one chose developed or updated and practiced a family communication plan. So again, as we go through, you'll know that there's many different ways to do these things. Some people get very elaborate, and some people, if you do a few minimum things, you're better off than others. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to go ahead and close that, but we'll go on. So thanks everyone for sharing what you've been doing. But first of all, I think it's important to recognize that depending where you are in the country, you face different risks. This is a graphic of some of the hazards that we have in Kansas, where I'm located. We obviously have weather, rain, flooding. Some of that is happening in eastern Kansas right now. We have extreme temperatures, tornadoes, we have fires, and we have cold temperatures. And actually, in the even since January, we've had all of these things. And then obviously to understand the weather terms, knowing the difference between watches and warnings. And I guess I'll admit that's one of the things that somehow I always have to review every year, and I never feel comfortable that I understand those. So, and they are somewhat different. They have different meanings depending on the hazard as well. So know what the risks are where you are, and then understand what the terms mean that you hear when they start talking about bad weather. So then the first thing to think about is preparing or updating a household inventory. And as it sounds, an inventory is an itemized list of the contents of your home, but include your basement, your attic, your garage, if you have storage sheds or outbuildings on your property, or you may actually have a storage unit somewhere else. And so you'd want to have an itemized list of everything, or at least the big stuff, right, that you have in those places. And the reason we do this is because if you experience an emergency or a disaster, or something happens to your property, you are going to need to have documentation for your insurance company so that you can make the claim and get reimbursed or replace the items. And so it is an initial investment in time and energy. Certainly we all recognize that. But I want to let you know, remind you that this inventory can take many forms. You can do a video, you can take pictures, and you can save the pictures to a flash drive or to the cloud, or you can do it on paper and pencil. I think a combination of all of that is probably the way to go. And there are some apps that can help you with that. All of those things change pretty frequently, so I think probably I would recommend the simplest thing that does what you need it to do is the best, and that might be pictures on your phone, which you then save to the cloud. And one way to do that is just to stand in the middle of a room and take pictures, against each wall, like face one wall, take pictures, turn, and turn. That would be one basic way to do it. But you'll also want to have some information about price too. You need to be as specific and accurate as possible when you describe your furnishings and your equipment. And another thing to think about, which again we sometimes don't think about, is that include items that might not always be stored at your home. For example, sports equipment that might be stored in school lockers, or if you have a child away at college and their contents are covered by your homeowner's policy, then you'd also want to have a list of those items as well. Once you have your inventory, it's recommended that you review your insurance, the terms of your insurance policies, at least every year. And you might want to have a sit-down meeting with your insurance agent maybe every other year. And the reason you do this is obviously we have insurance to cover major losses. So there is a trade-off between the size of the deductible and your out-of-pocket expenses and what's covered. So that is a reason to review every year. But another reason to review every year is so that we get new things and we get rid of things. And so if you review your insurance policy along with your household inventory, then you can make those adjustments. You want to be sure to understand the policy limits, as well as the coverage, what hazards are covered, what types of property is covered, and what are the exclusions. And this is what you're seeing here is from Ready Business, but it really can also work for individual homeowners as well, as a way to sort of summarize different insurance policy information. And you could use this if you're shopping for insurance, but also for reviewing and sort of summarizing what you do have. You'll notice that on this form it says, do you need flood insurance? Do you need earthquake insurance? Do you maybe need some sort of extra expense insurance? So keep that in mind. Other types of insurance that we don't always think about when it comes to emergencies and disasters, but can be very useful to have and to understand, are disability insurance. For example, if you are involved in this disaster or emergency and unable to work, because you've been injured, then your disability insurance might come into play. And also, in the most extreme case, if there's a loss of life as a result of the emergency or disaster, the life insurance policy would be important to understand. So here's a picture of some examples of a financial grab-and-go kit. Two different examples. You can see that one, the pictures are quite detailed, but if you only had a few moments to evacuate your home, would you have access to and be able to just grab cash, your banking information, your personal ID, all the things that you need to conduct your day-to-day financial life? And so really that's what the financial grab-and-go kit is all about. You would want to have information about your insurance policies, a copy of your household inventory, immunization records, important telephone numbers, any prescriptions, those kind of things you'd want to have. And if things are not, if you don't keep your family records, for example, your birth, marriage, or death certificates in your safety deposit box, you'd probably want to keep these in your grab-and-go box. Wills, contracts, deeds, those kind of things, and then titles to vehicles. But in general, probably the best place for some of those items is a safety deposit box. The last thing, a couple final things, is develop and practice a family communication plan. And this is a graphic from the national campaign, and where will your family meet during an emergency? But I think the initial question is, since none of us know where our families will be during an emergency, it's kind of like, where will you be and where will you meet? And so to decide and to know where that is ahead of time, because as I say, winging it is not an emergency plan. So you need to know where children will be and understand the emergency plan for your child's school, college, or childcare facility. Practice these evacuation plans and emergency procedures with the children on a regular basis, and make sure children have emergency contacts memorized or written down in a secure place. So who to call, where to meet, and then what to pack with you. So this is an opportunity for all of you to write some things in the chat box. So what are your go-to resources if you are going to teach about household inventories, financial grab-and-go kits, and family communication plans? I know that some of you on the webinar have deep experience in this. Kansas State has resources, University of Minnesota has resources, Florida, North Carolina State has resources. Many of our states have resources. And so what are your go-to resources? Because one of the best things I think about these webinars is that we share what our most valued resources are with one another. And as you're doing that, I would like to go ahead and share with you some other resources. So if you're not aware of the Extension Disaster Education Network, also known as EDEN, I encourage you to visit the website. Please know that the website is undergoing pretty major revision, and it will look differently in about six weeks or less, but there is a resource catalog there, and also EDEN does hold conferences and workshops. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has a disaster checklist publication that could be really helpful, talks about many of these things that you would want to include in a grab-and-go kit. And then obviously FEMA and ready.gov. And they have a calendar of seasonal and monthly preparedness messages and media toolkits and resources. And in that calendar, fall is hurricane season. And that is our segue to our next speaker. And so I just need to... no. So Mark, I forgot how to stop sharing. Oh,
To stop share, the toolbar would have moved up top in your window. So if you sort of hover, you need to move your mouse to get the toolbar to come up. And you should see a red stop share.
oh, there it is. Sorry. Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Mark, does that look okay?
It looks wonderful.
Thank you. So everything that Elizabeth said is definitely applicable for older adults, from the financial planning perspective to looking at the insurance documents, you know, having that plan where you can just grab and go with something. So I wanted to take it a step further, and specifically in Florida, oftentimes what you hear about most often is hurricane season. So the season officially began June 1st. It'll run through the end of November. For 2017, we're expected to have an above normal hurricane season. So they have named storms 14 to 19, actual hurricanes somewhere between 5 and 9, and possibility of some major ones being between 2 and 5. So that could really wreak havoc on the state, as long, you know, as many other states who have that coastline as well. So when you're thinking about specific to older adults and how their needs may differ than just our younger generations and what we need to think about, water is one of the things to think about. You know, we say disaster planning, a gallon per day per person. You know, that's great. You've got your little stockpile going. You've got 3 to 5 days worth of water. You've got extra water for your pets. But think about those gallon jugs and how heavy those gallon jugs are. And also think about, you know, the top to that gallon jug. That's a screw on top. So it could be heavy for an older adult to have to lift if it's totally full. So thinking about maybe putting water in smaller containers. And also if somebody has arthritis, that could be a hindrance to actually even opening up that gallon jug. So making sure, you know, it's accessible for everyone. Thinking about electronics. You know we need to have battery-powered radio, for example, that we want to make sure we have, you know, various chargers, even the battery backup ones, you know, extra batteries for electronic devices. But thinking about, you know, an older adult who could be in a wheelchair, maybe a battery-powered one that's rechargeable. So having some extra backup for that, extra hearing aid batteries. You know, learning how to back up any of the power supplies that's needed for medical equipment, for example. You know, possibly having a manual wheelchair for backup. So again, you know, everything is applicable across the board, but when you think about older adults or even populations who have special needs, you know, taking it that step further, making sure you're planning for those needs. Keeping extra supplies on hand. Lots of folks don't know this with prescription medicines. In Florida, there's an emergency prescription refill law that permits individuals who are insured or subscribers of prescription medication plans to be able to refill prescriptions in advance of a hurricane. So once you hear that a hurricane may be coming, you could technically go get a 30-day supply of your medication to have on hand and to be prepared. Again, you know, thinking about the eyeglasses, the batteries that I mentioned before. Oxygen is another big one. And then the medical insurance, Medicare cards, all of that kind of goes along with what Elizabeth was saying as far as being very handy to grab and go, and to make sure you kind of have it all in one location where you can access it very easily. A service animal may be another consideration that needs to be thought about. The service animal would be allowed to go to an emergency shelter, but you definitely would want to plan ahead and check with your county or your city's emergency management office for more information. And then also thinking about, you know, how much food do you need to have set aside for the service animal, having the medical and the vaccination records readily available, and then any contact information for emergencies as well, readily and available. And we may not have a service animal, but if you're like me, you likely have a pet at home. So what's going to be the plan for the pet? If it's just a pet, not a service animal, a lot of your shelters are not going to accept them, so you want to make sure you do ahead of time contact to try to identify the shelters that are pet friendly. And you're still going to want to make sure that you have all of your records for the vaccinations. Generally, if the shelter is pet friendly, they're often going to have to be contained within a carrier. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got a carrier or a crate on hand that could be used for that. Again, that you've got extra food that you're planning for, all of that type of information as well. So I've gave you a list of resources that I've pulled all of this information from. The first three are links to our extension documents, our EDIS documents here at the University of Florida. And then the other two are from the Center for Disease Control and specifically focused on an aging population relative to emergency planning for disasters. So it's going to be much broader than what I have focused on, as far as just not totally unique to hurricanes as well. So it can definitely give you a good point of view as far as a list and what you need to be thinking about ahead of time. The Red Cross also has a lot of good, useful information when planning for disasters, specifically for older adults as well. So again, anything that you think about for just a general population is definitely going to be applicable for older adults, but just taking it that step farther. And I think a lot of us, just the water example, very simple. We know we need to have the water, all of that, but we don't often think about what that might entail and look like for someone who might have special needs or be an older adult. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our next presenter, Lori.
When this is Sarah, as Lori gets the PowerPoint brought up, I will present the first couple slides. And as she's doing that, we're going to be sharing information about our financial recovery after disaster, our financial toolkit, and our videos. And you will see the word recovery, and you might be thinking, well, this is a webinar to think about how to plan ahead. And I argue that we need to look at what the next step might be, because that really helps us think about how we can prepare today so that folks are better able to recover. I also, as I was watching the list of participants, I saw many folks from a wide variety of universities, and I'm guessing you will probably be playing a very important role in your community following a disaster. And so knowing what resources are available for the recovery phase is really important. We've also found that being able to work with some of those recovery agencies and getting them familiar with resources prior to a disaster is much more effective than once a disaster happens, because their feet hit the ground, and if they aren't aware of your resources, they may not be, because they're too busy helping folks. So Lori, let's look at the next slide here. So as I indicated, we are going to be sharing information about the toolkit in the videos, and we're also going to be talking about strategies to educate and empower staff, volunteers, and survivors before, during, and after a disaster. So you might be wondering, how did this toolkit get started? And on our next slide, we've got our toolkit story. And we had the opportunity to work with the community in southern Minnesota 2 years following a major flood. And we were able to talk with both survivors and professionals. And we talked with them, and they shared amazing stories about what worked and what didn't work so well during the recovery process. And that really informed some of those actions that would be really helpful for folks to take prior to that disaster. So not only did we interview folks in that community, we looked at all the kinds of resources that are available. We did a focus group with professionals. We were fortunate enough with NDSU. I need to, Becky, you're on the call, or on the conference call here too. This was a joint effort with North Dakota State University Extension. So together we received that special needs grant from NIFA. And then we had several other folks reviewing it throughout the process, both the toolkit and then later with the videos. And so on the next slide, we always want to indicate that the toolkit is usable. There's folks can download the entire thing or just bits and pieces as they need it. It's consumable, so lots of tools and worksheets and things to help folks think through the process and to use to get organized. Customizable, states and communities are able to customize the resource list to make it very applicable to their geographic area. And then, of course, it's accessible online 24/7. The next slide shows one of our absolute favorite pictures that Lori Shermer, who just recently retired from North Dakota, took. But this gentleman is a disaster recovery survivor from the Minot, North Dakota area. And he came into a recovery event and shared his toolkit. And he talked about how it became his recovery center. And you can see the rubber bands on there. He used it to be organized. And so we were really excited to see this photo and see that it was used as intended. The next slide gives us a real quick overview of the 9 units in the toolkit and the corresponding videos. And so there are 6 full-length videos, and they range from 7 to 13 minutes. Our goal was to keep them short. Our advisory committee allowed us to eke out a few extra minutes because they thought the messages that were needed were needed. So those are a little bit longer. 6 full-length videos. There are also 6 promotional videos, 1 for each of the videos. And then we have 1 overall promo video, and we're going to share that with you on the next slide so you can get a feel for what's happening in the videos. And Lori's going to bring that up here in just a minute. And we were very fortunate again to work with the NDSU video team to develop this. So we'll take a look at it.
River came up over the road for quite some time. We had 8 inches on the main floor of our house.
The north wall and the south wall were off, and it looked like a dollhouse standing there.
The water level on the main floor had reached about 2.5 to 3 feet.
Do we walk away from the house? Can we afford to even rebuild?
View what's in front of you in the case of a marathon, not a sprint.
The University of Minnesota Extension and North Dakota State University Extension Service have developed Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit, to assist in financial recovery from disaster. The toolkit is free and available at this website.
By being able to use some of the tools that are available in our Family Financial Toolkit, you're able to look at goal setting and prioritizing, and to really take a look at what needs to be done immediately and what maybe comes a little bit further down the line, and be able to balance some of those needs.
It's not one big step, we'd like it to be, but it's really a bunch of small steps going on.
We saw a lot of people make some very, very difficult decisions in their own lives, and for a good number of people that meant leaving.
In a perfect world, we would be prepared for a disaster, but we know that this is not always the case. This video series has been developed to assist in the immediate need for financial recovery information following a disaster. The 6 videos in this series will identify important financial considerations for your disaster recovery.
We're 2 years removed, and there are a lot of people that have still had a difficult time making decisions on what to do, as you see a lot of empty houses still around here. There's a couple of houses that have never been touched since the flood.
One of the things that we did as a family was to look at, what are our short-term needs and what are our long-term needs, and I think that really helped us be able to tackle those short-term needs and kind of get some quick wins, as it were, and so we weren't so overwhelmed at looking at the big picture.
And look down the road. Will you be able to sustain those decisions in a year, in 2 years, 3 years? Because you really want to make the best decision for you and your family.
It is important to recognize that your life will never be exactly the same as it was. Consider what you want your new reality to look like.
Boy, when you face something like that and you come up on the other side, you know that you have the fortitude to be able to do that. And in life, you're going to have curves like that all the time.
Stay positive and keep moving forward, even though that your life all around you is falling apart. And for a lot of people, go find somebody to talk to. Find an outlet. Don't bottle it all up, because it can really put you in a bad place in your life.
A community arises out of a disaster stronger, more deeply connected, and great believers in themselves that whatever we face, we can face it together.
So we're pretty proud of these videos, and throughout all 6 of them, folks will hear directly from disaster survivors as well as professionals. and so they're really nice. Let's go to the next slide, Lori. We're going to walk you real quickly through the units of the toolkit. So the first one's kind of an intro piece that helps people really look at what's involved, what's in there, helps them pick and choose what's most applicable for them at any given time. We know that survivors are overwhelmed, and so we encourage them not to complete too much. But I think, again, as folks are preparing to think about what might they be able to do ahead of time, so that if they have to endure a recovery process, that could go smoother for them. And then also looking for people who can help them complete the tools is a big piece of that. In Unit 2, Unit 2 and 3 really work together, but they address several key strategies for financial recovery, as again identified by those survivors and professionals who work with them. And so there's, again, a variety of tools in there, and the example here on Unit 2 is documenting important details. On the next slide, where a lot of those tools happen, there's calendars, to-do lists, contact lists, finding people who can help. I, again, really encourage folks to think about developing that contact list now, right? Who are all those important people? We heard about that earlier in the webinar, but anything from medical folks to the plumber and the electrician and who's your cable provider, and having all of that information together and ready to go. But then folks can add later additional contacts, people they meet from FEMA and the County Emergency Management and some of those new people, but having that initial contact list. And I know I've got a lot of numbers in my phone, but what would happen if my phone went away in the flood or the tornado? It's nice to have all of that written down as well. Also thinking about finding people who can help. So that includes our circles of support, family and friends and coworkers and colleagues, maybe from our place of worship or professional organizations. But having that, again, that written list of contact people, our go-to people that can help provide those resources and support, whether it's labor or emotional support or whatever. But those are also very important. On the next slide, it talks more about additional resources, taking care of yourself, of course, thinking about the kids, learning how to accept financial help, how to engage with a financial manager, working with financial professionals, and then remember that there are a couple of videos that really go with this. There's one on bouncing back and adapting and finding help that support that information. And the next slide on Unit 4, this is, we have found this unit really valuable. We've taken it to disaster recovery centers when we worked at disasters across the state. But where do I start? It helps people think about responding in those first days and hours. What are the things that they should do? In the tools, documenting loss and damaged property. And this is where it's so very important. If folks have a copy of their household inventory, then they could just start highlighting on that what's damaged and what gets thrown out or what's missing, right? So if they do some of that pre-work, it's going to be better here. Also, if they have all of those important papers in a grab-and-go file, that'll be great. But if they're missing some things, this helps folks walk through that. And then also some information about from the IRS on that piece. So those are the first 4 chapters or units actually in the toolkit. I'm going to pass it to Lori, and she's going to walk us through the next few units.
Thanks, Sarah. So Unit 5 is another one of those that we take with us oftentimes to disaster recovery centers. Where am I financially? And this is really the foundation of the financial recovery puzzle. And we want people to be thinking about what's the current situation, but also what are those future obligations to be thinking about, and also where to find financial help professionally, and thinking about those decisions that you might make today and the impact in the future. Here you can see some of the tools from Unit 5. And as you take a look at some of those, know that, we're looking at the current financial situation, thinking about, could you afford another payment? Also thinking about what is the net worth, and understanding whether you could take on additional obligations. Do you have the resources right now to get back on your feet quickly? And oftentimes it's a reality situation of not being able to move quickly in these situations. We want to move quickly, but the reality of this situation is that we need to oftentimes step back and think about what we can do as we move forward, and recognize what the reality is of our current situation. We might already have a financial situation that's fragile, and we might be experiencing some anger related to the idea that this has just impacted an already fragile situation. And so we really need to help families to think about being creative, about pulling together a variety of resources. That might include things like food support, volunteer help to rebuild. It might be low-income housing options, and just those things to keep on moving forward. Here are a couple more of the tools. Requesting and reviewing the credit report is important for families to understand what their current situation is and think about the potential to take on additional debt. And so there is a worksheet to determine the current financial situation, to assess that situation, and then think about what those other obligations might be to move forward. Your credit report may indicate that you have a low amount of debt, and it may look as if you're able to take on additional debt. But by thinking about what those other obligations are that you have within your family, perhaps, things that you are anticipating coming up, life events and such, you might be thinking that you don't have the ability to take on additional debt. And one of our financial planners in our video series stated that if it looks good on paper, we have the potential to make the plan work. But if it doesn't look good on paper, then we should really rethink our plans. And again, we also have to think about what those considerations are that lenders may not see. They may say that we have the potential to take on additional debt, but we need to understand what other commitments we may have, obligations that we may have in the future. Now, Unit 6 is where will I live if I'm a homeowner? And homeowners whose homes have been damaged or destroyed are facing many decisions. Initially, it's probably just finding a place to be that is safe, sanitary, and secure. But beyond that, you're dealing with the mucking out and dealing with debris and mud and mold. And so then there are other considerations that we have. And this time can be seen as an opportunity for homeowners to actually step back and assess their situation. Oftentimes we rush into rebuilding and getting back to what we consider to be a normal situation, but it might be a time to think about what life stage are you at. And, if you're a young family, perhaps it's a matter of thinking, gosh, it would be nice to have more space than we previously had. Or if we're middle-aged or an older family that may be looking at being empty nesters soon, we might be thinking about downsizing or perhaps relocating someplace closer to work or to family, thinking about those tasks that we currently have to do, like mowing the lawn or doing some snow removal. We have a lot of that here in Minnesota. And so we might be reconsidering some of those things as well. As you see on the flow chart, there are a variety of questions that it takes you through. First of all, where you live, and then looking at what type of insurance do you have, what is the coverage, is this disaster federally declared, is the state declared, will there be a buyout program? As I mentioned, very often we're ready to jump in and do whatever it takes to get back to normal, but if we have the potential of a buyout, which may take up to 24 months to happen, should we jump in and fix something up if that buyout situation occurs? And then what other resources might be available, not only personally, but thinking about what the community resources might be. And we always suggest working with a disaster case manager to kind of stay in the loop of what's happening with other available resources. Unit 7 is very similar, but it is dealing with where will I live if I'm a renter. And you will see that, again, we're asking some questions about the current financial situation, thinking about those post-disaster housing needs and goals, and the housing commitments. Thinking about, can you get back into your unit? What happens with your lease? And so thinking about those types of things. Did you have renter's insurance to cover the personal property? And then also, what types of financial resources and assistance are available if you are a renter? And you see here another one of the tools from our toolkit, looking at whether you are a homeowner or a renter, thinking through your housing options. What are the housing options available? And what would the out-of-pocket expenses be? How does this fit into your plan? What are the positive, negative things about each of the options? And moving forward so that you can actually make a decision. Unit 8 is dealing with the new normal, or sometimes we say the new reality. And, you know, again, people try to come back to what was, and that's often not going to be possible again. So if we help people to think about what they can do moving forward, again, we hope that people are taking the time to think this through and to really understand the resources that they have. But we want people to think about things in terms of before disaster and after disaster. So we say BD and AD sometimes, and talking about what those resources are that were different and how life may be different. We know that financial recovery takes time, and this is kind of helping our survivors to think about how those changes will take place over time. Unit 9, Sarah mentioned this earlier, the disaster recovery resources for families and individuals. And this is an area where you can personalize. We do have some standard resources related to national resources, and Elizabeth provided you with some of those as well. But this is an experience of providing those local and state resources as well for your situation. So we'd like to take just a minute now and give you a chance to chat a little bit. You've seen our toolkit and our videos. How might you consider using those with survivors, professionals, and volunteers? And so if you would care to share that information in the chat, we'll take a look at that. Give you just a minute. And Mark, I'm not seeing chat if there are comments coming in, so if you could please.
Yeah, no comments
Okay.
up this point. Just, well, I don't know, others, Elizabeth or Laura, if you want to chime in. There was a comment that just came in, but I'm not sure if that was related.
Yeah, and so I see providing trainings with recovery staff prior to a disaster is effective. Share with community emergency response team members, and we have done that as well. Thank you. Love the videos. Do you have the links? Yes, we will share those links as well. So ideally, people would have disaster kit prior to disaster and continue to use it afterwards. Yes, we've actually had that situation where when I've shared it with our public access television stations, they've talked about, well, this is wonderful, but we want to share the resources before. And so we actually have a link to a video that we did as a public access television program as well. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Disaster preparedness is educational focus for Arkansas Extension homemakers for the next 2 years. Thank you, Laura. Great. And yeah, sharing with staff and counties, as well as posting videos on websites. Sharing with local government centers, workforce centers. We actually sent them out to all of the emergency management people across Minnesota and in North Dakota. So wonderful. Thank you. Okay, we will then go ahead and move on. And so, you know, as was mentioned, even though we frame this as disaster recovery, we do think that there is an ability to use these at all phases in disaster and with a variety of audiences. So we have looked at professionals, volunteers, and survivors. And in our timing, we say that there are ways to utilize these in preparation, response, and recovery. And so here's one example. You can see the chart and some tasks that we have identified that go with the chart in looking at preparation, response, and recovery. Things like creating a media plan, you know, how do you get messages out? We'll talk about some of those resources and how you might use them as well. And then financial preparation workshops. You see there in terms of preparation. One example that we've had is, and Elizabeth referred to this as well, in talking about that insurance checkup. That's a great action step for people to take. So you might show our insurance video and then talk about, have you done an insurance checkup, and ask people to take that action step. So here's the link for our toolkit and videos, and we can place that in the chat as well. But know that you can go ahead and link to that, and you can choose to download the toolkit to a personal computer or a flash drive. I even recently at a CERT presentation had somebody say that they had just downloaded it on their phone while I was speaking. So that takes up an awful lot of space, but if you want to have it readily available, I guess you can do that too. Okay, and we also wanted to develop some, as Sarah calls them, wraparound materials for these videos and the toolkit. And so we have gone ahead and developed some of these. Currently in process right now, we're working on a case manager training lesson plan. We also have a how-to guide, and we have bookmarks. We have a poster. It's a flyer, and then it has a larger version for a poster. We have some social media messages and some press releases, and have provided some websites as well. So as you look at these, work with them, please feel free to give us any feedback that you have related to those. And so we would like to end our portion with just a quote that we have from a survivor who reported that the toolkit was easy to use and useful for all survivors who had their home damaged, whether they owned or rented. And we'd certainly be happy to answer questions for you if we have time within the webinar, or please feel free to contact us as well.
Okay, so we would invite all of our attendees at this time to feel free to put questions in the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your screen, if you hover your mouse over that, you should see a little Q&A option there. Just click on that and feel free to enter any questions that you might have at this time.
So a couple links for folks. Someone emailed and asked about copies of the presentations. If our speakers are agreeable, I'll get PDF. I'll get their PDFs, or I'll get their PowerPoints, convert those to PDFs, and make them available on the Learn site. I just put that in chat at learn.extension.org. I assume most of you probably got here from that link, but if you want to keep that handy, also the copy of the recording will be available at that page too, and so feel free to share that with other colleagues that might not have been able to join us.
As Mark mentioned, you'll see a lot of the resources that we use. A lot of the links are there in the chat, and you can just click on those and go straight to those web resources. if you see anything you want.
We're not getting any questions in, so we'll just take another minute and wait for questions. Go ahead. We got a plug for the upcoming webinar, Laura?
No, not a plug, but an invitation for topic suggestions to anyone. Feel free to put those in the chat or email those to me, lhendricks@uaex.edu, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And it looks like we do have a question now. Has there been any outreach to local veterans organizations such as the American Legion or Veterans of Foreign Wars? Panel, who would like to take this? You'll need to unmute. Does anyone know of any outreach, or any of our other attendees know of any outreach to veterans groups or military groups?
I do not. I think that, and thinking about the military, we have a large military connected population in Kansas, so that's a really good suggestion. I think there are, I know, and actually, I don't, at Eden, there was a special needs grant to do some work with populations, and I think the military could be considered one of those, or veterans and older adults, so vulnerable populations as well. But so I don't know of any specific materials.
Okay, thank you. And Elizabeth also put in the chat a link to the upcoming online challenge for Prepare Kansas. Right, Elizabeth?
Right. So we have this challenge every year in September. It's evolved over the years, but it's now, we manage it through our K-State Research and Extension Facebook page as well as the blog. And I put the link to the blog that has the information. And our colleague Jamie Rathbun will be doing some Facebook Live events. We have weekly challenges. And this year the focus is on financial preparedness. The focus changes every year. Last year it was food safety. So anyway, shameless plug, and feel free for others to share what you're doing in the month of September for National Preparedness Month.
And could you just really shortly tell us, Elizabeth, how do people participate in, so they have to respond?
There's no registration. You just go to the Facebook page. We ask interaction through comments, posting pictures perhaps that show that you've been working on the challenges. The activities will be some of the activities that we talked about here today, since it is about financial preparedness.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Any closing remarks from any of our other panelists? Sarah or Lori, anything else? Okay. Let's see, we also have in the Q&A, this may be out of scope, but would a cyber disaster information be available? Could this be part of a plan to include what to do when your accounts are hacked? A cyber disaster.
Can I go ahead and answer that? There is actually in the monthly calendar, October is National Crime Prevention Month and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so there are some materials that come out, and definitely it's part of the whole planning process. So thanks, Leonard, for asking that question. In terms of resources, there is, if you go to Cybersecurity Awareness Month, usually there are some resources that are associated with that. I think in the past, in October, I've posted things on the blog about that.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.